With us today, we have Adam from CodeScene. Adam has been working in the space of code analysis for a long time and has both been in the academia and since 9 years ago, been founder and CEO of CodeScene. Welcome to the show, Adam, and please give us the background and what you're up to.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. So, yes, I'm Adam Tornhill, and my background is started out pretty traditional. I'm an electrical engineer by training, but I always wanted to work with software. So, I've been working with software for almost 30 years now. I still enjoy it. Been working a lot as a software developer, but also in various technical leadership roles. And what made my career path a little bit different is that a couple of years into my career, after having worked for some large product companies, I kind of noticed that software is really hard. Software is very unpredictable. It's expensive. We often need much more time and money than we expected and anticipated. And quite often, software ships with pretty low quality, disappointing the end users. And I kind of wanted to fix that, but I didn't know how. So I decided to look elsewhere for inspiration. So I went back to the university and started to pick up a psychology degree. And that sounds like an odd choice, but my reasoning was that psychology is very much about how we think, reason, and also how we solve problems as humans, right? So I did psychology for 6 years. And in the same time span, I was fortunate to work as a software consultant in various technical leadership roles. And that gave me so many opportunities to take what I learned in psychology and apply it to my technical day job. So that's the career trajectory I started out on.
And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about what was sort of the moment that led to you coming up with the initial idea for CodeScene.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a point in time where I was in the middle of my psychology studies. At the same time, I worked as a technical lead for a new product. And one of the main challenges I had was that the management, they wanted to go ahead with lots and lots of features. They wanted to accelerate the delivery plan. And at the same time, I was struggling a lot with the quality of the software. So that company had a lot of technical debt, which meant that everything they did was super unpredictable. So you had a feature which was planned to take 1 week, you ended up needing 2 months and shipped with disappointing results. So I was trying to fix the technical side of it. And I simply wanted a way of inviting a discussion, a conversation between management and the engineering side. And I simply found that ridiculously hard to do because code is hard to understand for developers, technical people like me. How can we expect someone that don't write code themselves to understand source code? So what I did was that I took a lot of inspiration from my psychology background, in particular from the field of forensic psychology, which is one of the areas that I studied. And what I did was I used a method called geographical offender profiling, which is a method you use in forensic to track serial offenders, basically by looking at, okay, how are the crime scenes distributed geographically, and what can those locations reveal about the criminal and their home location. So I thought this is exactly what we need in software, because what that method does is that it allows you to take a vast geographical space and narrow it down to a very small part that you can now focus your precious human time on to supervise and patrol. So I basically wanted to try to do the same in software, to take massive code bases, million lines of code, and narrow them down to a few hotspots where we know that if we focus our attention here, we're very likely to find something interesting. So that's kind of where it started out, and I'd be happy to continue talking about that.
I think it's extremely interesting how you put this psychological concepts and you sort of connected the dots and understood that this can be utilized in this, in the space of coding and programming. But how did you go from this fairly high level, as you said, sort of concept used in the forensic space to actually applying that on code?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I kind of knew there was something to the concept, but my first challenge was, how do I find behavioral data about software developers? How do I figure out how a developer move around in the code base? And then I kind of quickly occurred to me that we actually have that data already. We're just not used to think about it that way. And what I'm talking about is version control systems like Git, which we use as overcomplicated backup systems today, but they reveal a lot about how we work with the code as people. So I started to tap into those statistics, start to calculate various statistics, and then I looked at ways to visualize it so I could finally have a conversation around something as technical as code. And again, I took a lot of inspiration from forensics. So I basically visualized maps of software where you can see that, okay, this is a hotspot, meaning that a lot of developers are working here. So now I can apply my technical knowledge and see, do we also have quality problems there? If yes, then that hotspot is technical debt with a very high interest rate. And I simply started to use that as part of my own consultancy work. So I used it with my stakeholders and also used it with the engineering team, which appreciated it because it gave us a common picture. And I did that for a couple of years, and I never had any intention of building a product, right? I just wanted to do my own job a little bit easier. And then I ended up writing a book about it because I thought that this is something that could be of interest to software developers and organizations in general. So I wrote a book called Your Code as a Crime Scene, and published that book via the Pragmatic Programmers in 2014. And after publishing that book, I kind of realized that if I want these techniques to become mainstream, which I think is important for the world, then there has to be good tooling around it. So that was like my main motivation for founding CodeScene in 2015.
And so, how did it sort of go when you tried to turn what was initially a solution to your own problem into a product that could work for, engineers at very large organizations, engineers building their own startups, et cetera, et cetera? How did you sort of turn what was initially a project for yourself into something that was what we would consider enterprise ready?
Oh yeah, that was a lot of effort. I was fortunate to have some early adopters on board. So even before I started the company, I did a few services. So I got in touch by speaking at conferences. I got in touch with our CTO in London, who had a massive challenge with technical debt. They had a large code base. They had been running the existing tools in the code quality space. So they had been using tools like SonarQube, and they point that tool to their code base, and that tool tells them that, on your 15-year-old code base, you have accumulated 4,000 years of technical debt. So that's not really, I mean, it might be accurate, who knows, but it's definitely not actionable. So they needed some support. So I went in there and helped them out by prioritizing that, because that's basically what a hotspot analysis does. It sends you a positive message that, yeah, maybe you have 4,000 years of technical debt, but the debt that really, really matters for you is just this tiny part. And here's the evidence for that. So that proved to be successful. And I kind of noticed then that if I can do that as part of my consultancy business, and I can do the same thing in a completely different setting, then there has to be some kind of general value to it.
Got it. No, super interesting. And maybe just to sort of explore a little bit more on how you actually took this into a real world use case. When did you start noticing companies coming to you to use this? Especially, I think at the very early couple of years, running kind of almost a product led growth strategy to try to get some developers into the platform. How did you find that initial phase went, and when did you really have to start doubling down on outbound sales or trying to convert some of these early users into sort of enterprise customers?
So I think we built CodeScene in a very unconventional way when it comes to go to market, because I mean, it's a deep tech company, right? And developing a new type of code analysis tool it takes years, and it requires so much data to be confident in what we do. And I was prepared for that. I know that this is a long game. To me, it was never about making something rapid and exit. I always wanted to make change for real. So for the first few years, we actually worked as a hybrid where we were doing services to fund the development of the emerging products. We used the product ourselves to go to customers, like I just told you about, and do an analysis, deliver some value. And that was a way of founding the company, but it was also super important to find a product market fit, because that allowed us to understand what does our enterprise company really need. So we did that for 3 years, I would say, until 2018. And then we decided to turn around and start to become a product company. So in 2018, I think we had 50% of our revenue coming from services, 50% from subscriptions. And in 2019, we had turned it around, so 90% were product subscriptions. And the year after, we dropped the service part entirely. So we focus on just selling subscriptions. And I would say that it was in 2020 when we, until then, we have been bootstrapped. That's where we reached out and looked for VC funding. And once we get the VC funding, that's also when we start to build up a proper sales organization.
One of the things that I think are super impressive is we've seen the visualization of your tool, and also non-technical people can understand where their depth sits and where different vulnerabilities or different weaknesses in the code sits. But that's not only what you're doing today. Give us some view into the future and what you're building now.
Yeah, so we recently started to diversify our product flora. And one space that we are super interested in is AI, and in particular AI-assisted coding. And this has been like a personal dream of mine for a long time. So CodeScene, the product, has always been very good at finding bad code and prioritizing it and telling you what to do. But from there, it's a pretty large step to actually make some real change, because it requires that the developers work on the project, that they understand what to do, and that they know what to do. And that is always going to compete with the push for the next new feature. So I always thought if we can have an AI to automatically fix the code, that would be big. And with the recent development of all the large language models, we seem to finally have arrived. So right now we are building a new product called CodeScene Ace. It's actually already available. It's a real thing. You can test it out today. And it can take the findings from CodeScene, where we tell that, okay, this is a problem, this is technical debt, and it can automatically fix it. And it can do so with confidence, meaning that if you apply the suggestions from CodeScene Ace, you can be confident to 98% that this is the correct change. It will actually improve my code, make us more efficient without breaking it. So that's pretty exciting.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you have gone about developing this. Are you sort of fine-tuning off-the-shelf GPT model, or have you developed something completely proprietary, or what kind of advantage does everything you've been doing in the last 7 or 8 years give you now going into this new world of LLM at the core of many of these types of tools?
Yeah, so CodeScene actually has a very unfair advantage, because we have been in the business for now 8 years, and during that time we have built up so much data. We have a massive data lake. We have lots of information on what happens to code and what happens to software projects over time. And we also have a gold standard for good versus bad code. So that's our code health metric, which is it's a patented algorithm that we have. And it's, to the best of my knowledge, the only code level metric in the industry that correlates with the business outcome in terms of quicker velocity, fewer defects. So we have that gold standard, and that's basically what we needed in order to build a product like CodeScene Ace. Because AI today, I mean, everyone has access to the same AI models, right? These are not a competitive advantage. The competitive advantage is all the data we have, which means that we can use the right model for the job, and we can also evaluate the response of the AI and filter out bad suggestions, hallucinations, and keep the good stuff and show that to the users.
So that means basically if you're a developer today using CodeScene, you can pretty much get to gold standard more or less automatically, but not maybe not fully, but almost.
No, maybe not fully. We're aiming for the big wins right now, and
Yeah.
right now we can maybe fix 30% of all technical debt out there. And the idea is, of course, to continue to iterate on this, continue to improve it, and see how far we can take it. And what I like about that is that the more technical debt we can fix automatically, the more organizations and developers can focus their creativity and their time on the fun stuff, which is solving actual problems.
No, I mean, and this, I think, is the holy grail for a lot of companies, right? So, I mean, when you look in the landscape, obviously you have Copilot from GitHub themselves. You have Devin, which was announced a couple of months ago to great fanfare, and then perhaps slightly less great fanfare as it came out that maybe the demo was slightly staged. But love to understand a little bit about how you see, again, the unique data set that you have, how that compares to what some of these other players are working with, and why that is sort of a unique advantage beyond just sort of having lots of data. What specifically about that data allows you to build something much more accurate than those other players?
Yeah, I'm going to try. So AI-assisted coding has become a very crowded space, but what we saw is that most of these tools, Copilot included, focus a lot on helping developers to write more code faster. And I'm not entirely convinced that's what the world actually needs. And the reason I say this is because if you look at the research on what does developer actually do during their work week, writing new code is 5% of our work week. Right, so even like a dramatic improvement there can maybe save you 1 or 2 hours a week. So it's important, but it's not that disruptive, right? And it's not that groundbreaking from a productivity perspective. Instead, I think the big win is in the 70% that we as developers spend on trying to understand existing system and trying to understand existing code. So if we can use AI to make it easier to understand code by simplifying the code, by rewriting the code so that it's more clear what business problem it's trying to solve, make it easier to fit into human brain, then that's going to be a massive, massive win for all companies. So that's where we're focusing. And that means that CodeScene, we don't view Copilot as a competitor. Quite the contrary, we think these tools are very complementary and you actually could benefit from both. But I also think it's important in the age where AI assisted coding has taken off that you, as a company, that you approach it with caution and guardrails. And that's where I think that we have another sweet spot for the tooling, because if you use AI assisted coding, you want to make sure that the code that AI generates, that it's easy to understand. And again, that's where we can benefit a lot from our code health review, which is completely automated.
One final question that I had to you, Adam, is how much technical depth do you guys have?
Fun question. It's very close to zero. I mean, the thing is that CodeScene is still a fairly small company, and we're competing with players that might have 10 times the number of engineers we have. So it's very clear that we can't compete by playing by their rules. We need to do something different. And to us, code quality and a low amount of technical depth has been a key advantage, because it means we can iterate very, very quickly. We can take the product in new directions. We have a lot of freedom. So as a small company, we could never afford technical depth.
That makes sense. It's a great answer. So
It is.
yeah, I think, this was a fantastic conversation. Really, really good to get all of this background on CodeScene and what's led you here. Maybe as a final question to you, Adam, today, what is sort of what does the world look like when everybody has CodeScene? What does what does sort of the tech industry look like globally when there is no technical debt left in the world?
So yeah, that's my dream, and I really hope I get there one day. Because if everyone would be using CodeScene, what would happen is that, first of all, as private citizens, we would notice an improvement in our daily lives. I mean, we have all felt the frustration of interacting with some software service that's fragile or not helpful, right? So that quality of life would improve. Also think for the individual developers, there would be a massive change, because no developers enjoys wading through tons of poor code that could have been written in a better way. So I think as so many developers go into the space because they want to solve creative problems, right? And CodeScene allows them to do that. And finally, I think software companies would simply improve their profitability, because you can get so much more done without expanding the team more, right? So instead of wasting a lot of precious engineering hours, then use them to solve your actual business problems and move forward.
I think that's a great vision of the world, and of course, Daniel and I are fully bought in, and hope to see that is the future in the coming years. And obviously, as you said, I think taking 70% of the time that developers spend on their daily work and helping them to automate and accelerate that part of their work is sort of obviously the area that everybody should be talking about, rather than just the creating new code aspect of all of this. But really, really appreciate your insights today, Adam. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks a lot for having me. Take care.
You too. Speak soon.